Hello, everyone, and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network for our fourth segment of the day. As always, gotta make my picks for Sunday's slate of games. A lot of interesting ones. We're getting into divisional races, conference rivalries that could reignite come playoff time. We're looking at some very, very intense games here, surprising games potentially as well I'm going to be talking about. And so I feel like this is the time where all my picks are for meaningful games. And so for what it's worth, I might try and keep it diverse just because a lot of teams, I might have high regards towards despite their play. But now we're starting to get into some really integral matchups here. And not just, games that I feel personally could be enjoyable any given week. We're now in the nitty-gritty, and the games will reflect it. So without further ado, let's jump right into my picks for Week 11. Starting off, though, with perhaps the surprising game of the week, perhaps the only one potentially not with much at stake, maybe more so for the Denver Broncos and the Atlanta Falcons, but I do think that this is going to be a sneaky good game because both of these teams match up so weirdly in that this Falcons offense can be one of the better ones in the league, but that defense just is so horrifying to watch, and I don't really think it's capable of stopping anyone. Whereas the Denver Broncos, I feel that their offense is more opportunistic, definitely more based on Bo Nix's comfortability rather than, specifically structured plans just yet. They're getting to that point, but I don't necessarily think they're quite ready for a concrete game plan for Bo Nix. So it's a little bit more improvisational than you might think from a Sean Payton offense, whereas the defense has steadily been one of the most surprising units in the league. You may not be able to name anyone on that defense, but they are playing lights-out football. Did have a little bit of a mishap against the Baltimore Ravens, but they did come back and have perhaps one of the most impressive performances by a team against the Chiefs all year on the defensive side of the football. So it's going to be an interesting game, and I think it's going to be a shootout. That being said, I am going to pick the Falcons against the spread because the Broncos are 1.5 point favorites here. I do think that it's deserved, but I think that, the reason why I'm picking the Falcons, even though I speak so highly of the Broncos, is because it's funny, but I think that this Falcons defense could be the X factor here. I feel like if you could get one or two stops against Bo Nix, that could be enough. Because against the Chiefs, right, the problem with them not winning that game and having it come down to that field goal was because Bo Nix in the second half couldn't sustain drives. And so there are ways you can slow down the Broncos offense. It's not a world beater offense. In fact, it's perhaps the weak link of this team. And no matter how much it's improved, I feel like chances are, no matter how bad you are in defense, 1-2 stops could be the difference in this game. So look for a shootout for the Falcons against the spread to either cover or win outright. Because much as I want to respect the Broncos here and pick them to win this game outright, I just can't ignore the fact that Broncos offense has not necessarily put forth a fully complete performance just yet. They've had fits and spurts there, but they haven't really put it all together. They're getting there, but until they can prove to me that they can play complementary football alongside that defense, that they can't necessarily win games. And the Falcon side of things, you just have to stay consistent on offense and hope that the defense can get you stops, and this pick will be good as gold. But now let's get into some of the divisional matchups here. Some of the nitty-gritty matchups of the week. Starting off the big one in the AFC North, Ravens-Steelers. Ravens 3-point favorites here. It's going to be a bloodbath of a game. I feel like, like I said, Pittsburgh's defense is perhaps the most well-rounded and most apt to face an offense like the Baltimore Ravens and limit them to being two-dimensional. So I feel like, this is one of those games where it could go either way. I feel like the spread is low enough to say that the Ravens should cover and win outright. But I do think the Steelers are gaining momentum here. I feel like you can't ignore the fact that this offense feels reinvigorated. The acquisition of Mike Williams with the addition of Russell Wilson at the quarterback position. I feel like, this team is primed to get ready for this game. And not for nothing, I respect the Baltimore Ravens, but the Steelers have been one of those teams that just have their number year in, year out in the Lamar Jackson era. And until, they can start to perform at a consistent level against Pittsburgh, this is going to feel like another slog for them in this game. So that's why I picked the Steelers to cover, because I'm not necessarily certain they win, but it's going to be one of those games where they're going to keep it close enough in the final moments to where they could go one direction or the other. And even if they lose, it's not going to be by much. And even if they win, it's not going to be by much. That's how close I think this game is going to be. So the safest bet to me seems to pick the Steelers against the spread, but to cover. Because this Ravens team, as talented as it is mortal. And even though the mortal side of the football lies in the defense, this offense hasn't necessarily been one of the better ones against the Steelers in the AFC North. Yes, they have Derrick Henry now, and he's a different animal. But I think the Steelers just are looking very much like a team that's ready for anything right now. Ready for the challenge, ready for the burdens that come with winning games unexpectedly, being a surprise team. And Mike Tomlin is perhaps one of the best leaders to lead that charge in the NFL. So these Steelers are going to be no pushovers in this one, and that's why I got to give them the respect they deserve in terms of my prediction. Now let's get into the conference matchup that everyone wants to see. Marquee football here. Whatever you're doing during the afternoon, or, in Central Time in the early stages of the morning, tune into Chiefs-Bills. This is going to be a great matchup. Perhaps the only one where you say, for the rest of the season, the Chiefs aren't going to be favored in, and potentially the game where they do end up falling short in their quest to go 17-0. But, since Buffalo are 2.5-point favorites, shockingly, I do have to pick the Chiefs not to win outright, but against the spread here. Because I think Buffalo has the talent to win the game. They had the strategy to win the game. And most importantly, they have the record to prove it. They are, like I said, 3-0 against the Chiefs in the regular season. I think, the Chiefs are a good enough team to keep it close, but the mirage surrounding them, the fact that they've been a little bit lucky, the fact they played in 7 one-score games, the fact that, they keep on finding ways to win, toe being out of bounds, a blocked field goal, comes to tell me that eventually doomsday is coming for them, and it could be against a team that's had their number and they are familiar with this season. And so that's why I'm a little bit anxious to pick the Chiefs outright, and I'm going to change it to against the spread pick. But I feel like this game is still going to be too close to call. Even though the Bills certainly have the talent to make this a blowout. Because on the other side of things, the Chiefs defense is talented, but they're compensating for a lot. And so eventually, they're going to get overwhelmed in one of these games here, and the Bills look the most apt to do it. So, as close as I think this game is going to be, I would give the Bills the win, but the Chiefs the respect they deserve in covering this low spread here. And so, it's kind of weird and cliche to pick against the Chiefs, but it's got to happen sometime, and the Bills are just sitting there 3-0 against them already in the regular season in the Mahomes era, waiting for 4-0 to come for them and to ruin the Chiefs' chances of going undefeated, ironically. The last game I want to quickly touch on before we go to break, Texans-Cowboys, not necessarily the most attractive of games anymore. Houston 7-point favorites as a result. I'm going to pick them in this game, but it could be one of those games where the Cowboys put together a couple interesting drives to make you say, this team can be relaxed for the rest of the season, and going into next year, Dak coming back can actually sustain him, make him feel like he's not going to have to be the superhero week in, week out. And so this game, I feel, yes, the Cowboys aren't going to win, but they're going to show us that they still have some heart to them in this one and prove that next season could be a turning of the new leaf for all of these players. Let me know what you think in the comments section below, because our final segment, we're going to transition from all of these interesting games and focus on one game in particular, Sunday Night Football. Perhaps one of the more bizarre games this week to close out that Sunday slate. Bengals-Chargers. We're going to have all things betting when we come back after the break for that game.